Mysterious. I was now being watched by whoever or whatever had done this hideous deed. There were 3 sleeping bags in the tent, and 2 were stained in blood, yet there was only one man. The stench gagged me. The flesh was all but gone from the bones, and yet there was something odd about the body as I stood over it looking down. The entire rib cage was collapsed to the floor. His chest looked like a balloon that had the air let out of it. Welcome back to Cryptid Mysterious. Today we have 2 stories that you are not going to want to miss. Before we jump right into our first encounter, please hit that subscribe button for me. And if you would, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments. Let's get into our first one. This account comes to us by Nicholas Abratsov. It's a Russian name that I've never seen before. Sorry for messing it up. A resident of the great state of Tennessee and a transplant from the old Soviet Union. He's a physicist and was quite the skeptic until the day of his own encounter. An encounter of which you'll soon hear. This is what he has to say. My good friend named Hector just happens to be the landscaper at my home. Some might say, how is it that a physicist befriends a laborer? Well, I'll answer that question quite succinctly. Over time, in conversing with Hector at my home, I found that he had a great interest not only in all things plant-related around the house, but with everything found in the forest as well. He, having no formal education whatsoever, other than what he had self-taught himself in the course of being a landscaper, had given me more than a run for my money through the years, with the wealth of knowledge that he possessed in regards to all things botanical. Having had many invaluable conversations with him over time, and knowing him to be as fit as a fiddle, at some point, the 2 of us became engaged in regular forest hikes together as a somewhat leisurely activity and form of staying fit. And so, the bond of landscaper and physicist was formed. Over a period of about 15 years, Hector and I have been through just about every square mile of the Grand Smoky National Park in the Nantahala National Forest. I would be willing to wager, if it could be proven, that the 2 of us have hiked 100,000 miles together between the 2 wildernesses. In the summer of 2015, we'd made our way over to the Klingman's Dome Observation Tower. From there, we were scoping out some promising areas in the region of the Little River's tributaries. The following weekend, we hiked into the area coming from the Newfound Gap Road in the area of the Chimney Tops, and immediately found ourselves in the midst of an extremely rigorous hike through the timber. Our plan for the day was to hike in until we hit water, and then to follow what we had found until we ran out of time. Our typical day hike involves allowing ourselves enough time to get in and out of where we are, including the possibility of one of us turning an ankle or the like, which has actually happened. You don't want to be stuck in the forest at night. We were about 3 hours in when we heard a tremendous crash of a tree falling to the ground to our southwest. After hearing that, we decided to alter our plan to that of finding the tree that had fallen. So we commenced the hike in that direction. We had walked about another mile when we heard yet a second tree come crashing down, followed by what sounded like a loud conversation in a foreign dialect. Now, you know that I'm from Russia. To me, it sounded like one of the Siberian dialects, of which I do not speak, nor do I understand. Hector and I, being uncertain as to just what we may be walking into, started to move much more slowly, and yet, nevertheless, stayed the course to find those who were talking. After stalking for what must have been another 100 yards, this jabbering conversation was getting even louder. Suddenly, we saw a huge black creature moving just ahead, and the two of us simultaneously dropped to our knees behind some bushes. This beast had walked behind maybe 6 or 7 trees and seemed to be talking as it did so. Then as quickly as it had appeared, it had moved out of our sight. We were astonished at what we had just seen. It was unmistakably large. It was bipedal. It was a giant, covered in brown fur, the size of an ox. I can tell you that it was all of 4 meters tall, and better than a meter in thickness, at the very least. It had the physique of a massive bodybuilder, and we had no desire to learn how they were felling trees. For fear of our very lives, Hector and I immediately started to retreat, not knowing how we would be greeted should we be found out by this beast and its cohort. As we backtracked, we could hear 2 very distinct voices, one being higher pitched than the other. They were making so much noise between the speech and the rustling of the timbers that we had no fear of being heard as we retreated from our position. It was obvious to us that they were not expecting any company in these woods, and were doing nothing to quiet themselves in any way. Some may say, "Why didn't you stay to see more and listen to them?" To which I would retort, "Well, unless you wanted to die, there would be no reason to stay." We were so frightened by the very sight of one monster that we did not want to see a second. All we wanted to do was get away, and quickly. In Russia, we have a saying similar to that which I've heard in this country, that being, "I will believe it when I see it." Well, that day, I had moved from being skeptical about the creature known as Bigfoot to being a full-on believer, having now seen one with my very own eyes. Besides the actual sighting, the most amazing aspect was that of the spoken language between them. There was a distinct back and forth, like 2 old washwomen going on between them the entire time we were near to them. To date, it was the most incredible event of my entire life. Man, I love all these stories. No matter how detailed and dramatic these are, or how simple, I love them. Before we get into our next story, which I guarantee will make your skin crawl, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and you know what to do if you've had an encounter. Drop me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com. This next one comes to us from Andy, a resident of British Columbia. He begins, "Well, in preparation for this, I had many things that were passing through my mind as far as what I was going to say. I decided for some strange reason to bring you way back to my teenage years, where this lifestyle of mine actually began, in the hope that it would help somebody else out there who may be a lot like me. It'll also help to clarify why I was where I was when this whole affair came to be. As a young man, I had a troubled upbringing, to say the least. The home in which I lived was not exactly a loving and kind environment to grow up in. I think I was about 14 or 15 years old when I made the acquaintance of a beautiful and cheery girl around the corner from me. It was love at first sight. She had a beautiful sister who was slightly older than her, and their family was everything that mine was not. As the next couple years progressed, there wasn't anything that I wanted to do more than to hang out with her and hold her hand. There is much more than I have time to say or care to say, but after about 2 years and out of the clear blue sky, she broke up with me and the tears flowed like water. For the rest of my life, I was truly unable to fall in love again. Although I had some friends and relationships, nothing was ever the same. After many years had passed, someone met her at a high school reunion and overheard her say, "I should have married Andy." Upon hearing that, the wound reopened, and badly. Through the many years, as they passed, I had become, as the song title so aptly said, the solitary man. I didn't necessarily like to be alone, but I found myself in that state more often than not, especially when it came to hunting and fishing. My married friends just don't have the same freedom or zeal to do the things that I do, and so it is that I am predominantly solo. During my relationship with this girl, she'd given me on my birthday a necklace. It was the head of Christ overlaid on a cross, and it had both of our names etched into the back. Many years after the breakup, I took the necklace out of my dresser and threw it into the sea, never to be seen again. Well, as fate would have it, a seed had been planted in my life, and as time passed, I'd entered into a new love affair with Jesus Christ. It was this love affair that fulfilled all the things in my life that had been lost, and then some. In August of 2001, I planned to backpack into the Banff for the weekend in the hope of finding new and suitable hunting grounds for the fall. I was somewhere in the area of Mount Richardson and the Pipestone River. During the course of the first day, the majority of my time was spent just getting up and into the area that I had in mind, with only a couple of hours left in the day to do a little reconnaissance, if you will, of the area. The following morning, having spent the night in my bag by the fire, I arose to a beautiful new morning and started hiking due northeast into an area that I hadn't been before. I was coming over a low-lying ridge that was looking down into somewhat of a hollow when I noticed what I believed was a tent in the trees below my position. I decided to go down and introduce myself to whoever was there. It took me maybe 10 minutes to make it to the tent. When I finally walked up on it, the tent was half knocked down and the campsite appeared to have been abandoned. The aluminum poles on the one side were collapsed, and I could see a large clean cut in the fabric of the tent on the same side as the collapsed poles. For whatever reason, I took a moment to lift the poles back into place and straighten them in the process, in order to get the tent back into form. Having done so, I walked around to the front, where the entry flap had been torn open, and I stuck my head inside. Lying on the floor of this tent was a fully dressed corpse of a man, in what was a pool of dried up blood that covered most of the tent's floor. There was a handgun lying on the floor, and numerous expended shell casings were strewn about. A chill came over my body that is indescribable. It wasn't all about what I was seeing, but all I can say is that I felt like I was now being watched by whoever or whatever had done this hideous deed. My hair was standing on end. I was trembling. There were 3 sleeping bags in the tent, and 2 were stained in blood, yet there was only one man. The stench gagged me as I looked more closely at him, so I pressed my handkerchief against my nose and mouth. The flesh was all but gone from the bones, yet there was something odd about the body as I stood over it looking down. The entire rib cage seemed to be collapsed down to the ground. His chest looked like a balloon that had the air let out of it. The clothes were basically flat to the tent's floor. I shuddered and turned my gaze to the torn tent wall. What I had seen on the outside as a cut to the side of the tent looked like it may have been made from the inside as a means of escape. But from what or who? I must tell you that at this point, I was in a state of shock. I continued to survey the inside and now took note of the fact that there were some large footprints on the tent's floor that were made of dried blood. It was difficult to say how many because they were all overlapping each other and smeared around. There was one I could see clearly, and it consisted of the toes, heel, and ball of a giant foot. It was like a man's, only very oddly shaped. It was then that I stepped back outside and started to look around in the direction that someone may have went, had the person fled through the torn side of the tent. I walked about 30 feet from the tent, where I came upon a buck knife lying open on the ground. As I began to scan around the knife, there it was. Another body, fully clothed, lying face up on the ground. Walking over to the corpse, I looked down on the body and I was struggling to keep my composure. I say this because he only appeared to be face up. What I was actually looking at was a dead man laying face down, whose head had been twisted around, facing now backwards. I could see the neck bones. They were completely disconnected from each other. I went back over by the tent to confirm in my mind that I had seen 3 sleeping bags. And I had. Where was the third person? I continued to look around. The feeling of being watched was now amplified within me. I looked around for about another hour or so and could not find a third person. God only knows what happened to that individual in the woods. I returned to the body laying on the ground and took the wallet out of his back pants pocket. As I took the driver's license out, I was looking at the smiling face of a 27-year-old man named Walter, who was now a decaying mass of bones laying in the woods. I began to weep profusely. A great sadness fell over me as my mind tried to comprehend the scene which I was standing in, as it must have occurred. The footprints could only have been those of a Sasquatch. The man whose body was on the floor of the tent had obviously fired numerous rounds in an effort to fight off the invader and had lost. When I went back to the tent, I saw 4 shell casings. Perhaps there were more that I hadn't seen. The sheer terror that must have unfolded in this campsite was enveloping me as I stood there. One thing that struck me was that the bodies had not been torn apart by anything else in the woods. They were completely intact as they had met their death. I left this place hiking double time until I had made it fully back to my vehicle, which was nothing less than a 10-hour speed hike. I didn't know I had it in me, but I couldn't stop to rest. The entire time I was in fear for my life, and that kept me going full tilt. That just makes you want to go out running around looking for Bigfoot now, doesn't it? Oh man. Some of these stories are... Obviously there was no actual direct Bigfoot encounter in that story, but the footprint in blood in the tent, the giant footprint that was oddly shaped, The man with his chest caved down literally to the floor, like literally flat to the floor. The other guy with his head spun around backwards. And the fact that no animals or anything had been tearing at these bodies. Obviously, they had been there for a little while. Usually, if there's a body in the woods, creatures are going to come in and take advantage of the opportunity and have some lunch. But they hadn't been touched. And that seems to be a pretty common thread when people find bodies that are seemingly linked to Bigfoot. Well, guys, I do appreciate you hanging out. Again, if you've had an encounter with Bigfoot or any cryptid or anything mysterious, I'd love to hear about it. Drop me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com. And I'll see y'all in the next one.